This week I've had the great pleasure of chatting with Tim and Tina, catching up with them, hearing about how life is going, where they are, and what lockdown looks like, how it's affected their work, how the work's still going on, and what their plans are to return to the UK. So enjoy listening to what Tim and Tina had to say. Well, hi Tim and Tina. Thanks for giving up your time today to spend a little bit of time filling us in on what you've been up to, how things are going, and how we can be praying for you. It's really great to have that update, such that we can be praying specifically for you. As we start, why don't you just fill us in a little bit on how you guys are doing and what you've been up to recently?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks very much for calling us up, and it's lovely to chat with you. And it's lovely to know that we can extend our greetings to all our family back in Manor Park Church. So hello to everyone. How are we doing? Well, how are we doing, Tina, during this current pandemic? How's anyone doing? It's life's confusing enough living in this part of the world, and it got a little bit more confusing with with COVID and the restrictions that have been placed on our lives here. So yeah, that's been interesting. So life has been a little more challenging in terms of working around and through all those restrictions that are now in place. But having said that, we've adapted as an organisation and as individuals to the way we do work, and we give thanks to God that Tina and I have both kept fit and well during this time, which has been encouraging to us in very few cases actually in this part of the world. So the pandemic hasn't been too bad, has it? We've been struggling a bit with logistics at this time, in terms of we're sort of reaching the end of our commitment to live in this part of the world, and we're preparing to move back to the UK to continue the work from the UK. But the practicalities of making that move back have been impacted greatly by COVID-19 and all the shutdowns of aviation, transport, that sort of thing. So trying to work out how we get our stuff back home, how I ship film kit, media drives, that sort of thing, getting them back has been challenging, and it's taken a while to find an organisation that we can rely upon sufficiently to get stuff back at this time. Yeah.
Am I right in saying you guys were thinking you'd move back in June?
Yeah, that was always our plan, was to come back in June, but our flights have been cancelled. So we've been put on, rerouted. We can't fly back to our regional airport in the UK, so we've been rerouted to London Heathrow. So we've got the logistics of working out how we get back home from there, and also the flights aren't confirmed at all. So we've been told to expect them to be cancelled at a moment's notice and to be rescheduled again at a later date. So at the moment,
we're flying back in June, Tim, or is that flying back at a later date? Or
yeah, so at the moment in later part of July, so around about the 22nd, 23rd of July.
Okay.
Will be the travel dates. Yeah.
Okay. So lockdown life in the UK, I guess, has been. We all know what that's looked like. Or we do in this country. I guess you guys living where you do, out in Asia, haven't experienced it in the UK. We've been cooped up in our homes, but not too bad, I think. And the rules are starting to relax a little bit here. What's lockdown life actually looked like for you? How's it actually changed your day-to-day lives?
Well, in the beginning of the lockdown here, I guess it was very similar to how things were done in the UK. I think perhaps one of the big differences culturally between here and the UK is when a government tells you to do something, it's done. Here. There's no arguing. So people will do what they're told. So everyone went into the lockdown. There didn't seem to be any problems of government here trying to enforce that at all or remind people. But at the same time, here people are living on the breadline, and people make on average about £7.50 a day. That's a daily wage here. And if you remove that ability to work, very, very quickly, you're going to go below the poverty line, and life's going to become desperate for you. So the people here observed for a long time the lockdown, and I think the government were actually very understanding and very tolerant of the fact that people were becoming in need of actually getting back to work again, because they just could not afford not to be working. So you know, the lockdown was relaxed sooner than it was in the UK, sort of unofficially relaxed, but it was relaxed because literally it got, you know, people could not afford not to work here.
And I think the difference is as well that people don't have fridges. I mean, a lot of people do, but in the villages, a lot of people don't. So they wouldn't have a freezer, so you can't stock up on food. They go out to the market every day to buy what they need, or they won't even have the facility to really cook a lot of food, especially young people might just live in a room and they will always eat street food. So you cannot keep people in their homes in quite the same way, because they have to have access to the food. So it was done in a slightly different way, far easier for us because we do have a fridge and a freezer, and we can go and buy stuff and stock up. And so we worked from home certainly for a month, 6 weeks, until it's just beginning to ease here. But it wasn't done in quite the same way as the UK, because it couldn't be. Having said that, if the numbers are to be believed, we've only had just over 3,000 cases and just over 50 deaths. So we're, in a relatively, it's been easier here.
Well, I think one of the things that impacted us the most, Mike, was we've seen people queuing for food, for free food, long lines of people, and we've seen there's a main street that runs right the way through the heart of the city here, very long road, and right the way along that road there were people queuing to sell their jewelry, and things were desperate. You know, things got really desperate for local people. You know, and some young people that we work with outside of our work for Destiny, we've had to draw alongside and help them at this time, because, you know, life has been a real struggle for them, and unable to pay rent, you know, not enough food for money for food, that sort of thing. So you know, we've experienced and we've witnessed people really suffering.
I think another thing as well at the beginning, and it's settled down now, people have almost gone the other way, but they were incredibly fearful. They call it the virus, and especially of foreigners. And we found it difficult just wherever we went. Sometimes we were refused entry to places, or we couldn't go because they were fearful that it was the foreigners bringing it in. And so there was quite a lot of, I'm not saying it was hostility, but they were fearful of us. And you would see people actively cross the road
to avoid you. Yeah, that was unpleasant.
So that was difficult at the start of it. Now I think they know that if you're here, you've been here for some months, because they haven't let anybody into the country for months now. So if you're here, you were here at the beginning, and they're not so fearful of you. But that was a big thing. And I read recently that across Asia, this particular country had the highest levels of anxiety. I'm not entirely sure why that was, but certainly even with our local staff, they were incredibly anxious, and a lot of mixed messages, and, you know, strange, some of the cultural beliefs and things coming through that impacted that.
Hearing all of that makes me feel incredibly fortunate to be living here in the UK. Yeah, that poverty line that so many people are living so close to, they've had to resort to those measures of selling their possessions and
Yeah, no one
going
has
without
savings.
meals.
No
That
one can afford to have
that
savings here. Yeah,
was heartbreaking to see,
it really
actually.
was.
I think we knew people were struggling, but when you see them lining up, and you look and you think, oh my goodness, I can't see the end of that line. These people don't have much. They really are desperate.
You've shared some of the overall effects in Southeast Asia of COVID. How about your work with Destiny Rescue? You've just shared the poverty in general that's in the area that you live in, and the heartbreaking nature of seeing people sell their possessions. But you work with kids also in a heartbreaking situation as they're being trafficked. And how's that work going? And maybe if you want to share how that work's going, and then also maybe the effects that COVID and lockdown have had upon your work for both of you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the work continues across all our project nations in this part of the world. Obviously, we've had to change the way we work, whilst most of the world are under the sort of restrictions they're now under in terms of movement. So the red light districts have all shut down. The bars and the clubs that you'd associate with the exploitation of children that we're concerned with have shut down. They will reopen, but for now they are shut down. And
they're only shut down for public health measures because people, the massage, it's close contact. So they've shut down for those reasons, not for any other reasons.
So it has to change the way that we work as an organisation in terms of finding these kids who are being exploited in these places. So our agents are unable to go out into the bars and into the red light districts because they're just not open. But what they're having to do is infiltrate online activity. So a lot of the perpetrators are now selling children. They're diversifying the way they do business, and they're selling kids online using social media apps, which often are encrypted and they're difficult, to get into to find the evidence that you need to begin an investigation with government forces to bring perpetrators to justice. So we're working more in terms of the cybercrime side of exploitation of children right now, with some success, which is good. It's broadening the horizons of the organisation, and we see this as once these restrictions for COVID are lifted, what's developed online isn't going to go away. That's going to sit there alongside the more traditional way of kids being sold in bars, clubs, red light districts. So, if anything, it's going to get busier for us as an organisation. And if you think about the effect of what this pandemic is going to have on large parts of the world, it's going to bring an awful lot of people into extreme poverty. There will be far more people in desperate situations than there were before this pandemic arrived. And that means there are going to be far more people who are going to be exploited by traffickers and brokers who are going to be wanting to move people around and make money out of them. So that's something, you can look at an example. A few years back in Nepal, there was a devastating earthquake. But in the immediate aftermath of that, human trafficking surged by some 20% in terms of the numbers of people being trafficked, because people were in desperate situations. And when you're in a desperate situation, you're more likely to make desperate decisions to try and make some money. And those decisions can involve, letting your daughters go and work in those places to send money home to a family who are in real need. So we really see that there's going to be an explosion in trafficking, and it's going to be a real task to try and keep up with just the explosion in activity that we think will happen.
I suppose in terms of my work, so just as things were really taking off here in terms of number of cases, and the anxiety levels were reaching a high, we were due to have the health week. So we had 2 health weeks planned because we generally do them in the school holidays, and the big school holidays here are March and April. So this was the week before we were due to have the health week, so all the girls were due to come. So we had to cancel that and the one in April, which was a shame. And, you know, as we mentioned before, our numbers really of people with the virus is incredibly low, but actually the fear and anxiety is disproportionately high. And if you think, these are girls who are already traumatized, so their response to this was more anxiety, more fear, even though they are otherwise, you know, young, reasonably fit and healthy girls who probably wouldn't have been particularly unwell by the virus. The fear of it and the fear of losing their jobs and their income was having a far greater effect than the virus would. So it's a real shame to cancel the health weeks, because part of that is we do some psychoeducation, some, you know, special trauma related counselling courses to help them. So what we did instead, we tried to move it online. So we have chat groups with the girls, our workers do, and so we increased that coverage, and each day we were sending them Bible verses, messages of encouragement, trying to get them to talk about how they were feeling and give them tools to try and deal with some of this anxiety, give them simple health messages about the virus, because there was a lot of mixed messages going on. So we tried to communicate in a way that we could to try and really help these girls in a time of greatest need, really. And then just recently, we've had some of our restrictions lifted, so we are actually planning a health week the first week of June. We're coming out of our sort of lockdown, we're in phase 2, and we hope by the 1st of June we might be in phase 3, so we will actually bring 10 girls in for the week. We can have one of the health weeks that we missed in March. So that's been really good news, and that's something I'd really value prayers for, because nothing's certain at the moment, and at any time the government might say we're heading backwards rather than forwards. So it would be good to have those plans fulfilled if that's the way it's meant to be.
I mean, I think you shared a little bit earlier that although you're returning to the UK, you can plan to continue working for Destiny Rescue. Do you have any idea of what that will look like, working for Destiny from the UK? I guess Tim, do your meetings online, but Tim, I guess the healthcare may be a little bit more difficult at a distance, or?
Yeah, it's kind of a blank canvas, really. It's never been done before. So Destiny have never operated out of the United Kingdom, so we'll be the first people to do that. In terms of how my role will develop, it will change a little bit. That, you know, I will be looking to secure a team of filmmakers who would be willing to travel occasionally and give up some time to go and make a film for Destiny, and I would be in sort of an executive producer role for that. So the material will come back to me to be produced into films. I will also be traveling each year. I anticipate spending 2 or 3 months on the road over the course of a year. So I'll be visiting project nations and filming large amounts of media, and then bringing it back to the UK to produce fundraising material in that way. Tina, what about the way you see your work from the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little unclear at the moment. Certainly in terms, you mentioned the Health Week, Mike, and one of the things we'll be doing this Health Week is actually getting some staff to take on all the different roles within the week, so that can happen without me being there. I mean, that was always the plan anyway. It is far better for so many of these messages to be given by local staff rather than foreigners. You know, we don't have the translation, you don't have the cultural issues. So the plan was always for the local staff to be able to deliver every aspect of that week. And so that's always been in the planning for that. I already help and do the health work remotely for the other countries that we serve. So some of that will stay the same, but actually how that will work and how much work I will do, I'll still have to work that one out. I think depends how much I'm needed, really.
Okay. It's been great to hear all that update and what's been going on with you guys, and Tina, you've already shared one prayer request for that health week coming up at the beginning of June. How else can we be praying for you, and maybe giving thanks for things as well as praying for things?
Yeah, just for we'd really value prayer for all the practicalities of this move back to the UK. It's complicated. We've had to extend our stay here longer than we anticipated, and as such, our tenancy agreement on the property we're in expires. So we actually have to move again here before we move back to the UK, and we didn't really see that one coming. So that's an added sort of stress at this time. So we would value prayer for just all of those practical things of this moving and then moving again, and the logistics of getting stuff back to the UK whilst this pandemic rumbles on. Also for visas, at the moment there's an amnesty here for people forced to stay longer than they'd hoped in this country during this pandemic. So just prayer that we can cross the finish line with this within the dates of this amnesty that's been agreed. So we don't have to go through any complexities with visa applications again, which are always stressful. And on top of everything else, we would just value prayer that we don't have to jump through those hoops again before we come home. Also, you know, for the journeying back to the UK, that we would remain fit and well before we travel. The last thing we want to do is develop any kind of bug where we might get a temperature and then get waylaid somewhere halfway home, you know, in the Middle East or something, and forced to stop over somewhere for a period of time in quarantine or something awful like that. We would just like to remain fit and well and get back in good time, really. And finally, that when we get back to the UK, that we will be able to get our home back in early August as planned. But you know, in the current situation with the COVID-19, it's more complicated, and there isn't a guarantee that we'll actually get our house back when we anticipate that happening. So just prayer that would still go ahead and we will be able to go home. Yeah.
Great. Well, it'll be great to pray for you guys in a little bit. And yeah, thanks for sharing that update. It's been really great to hear from you.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. It's good to chat, and it's lovely to be part of the service.
And we are grateful for every month, you know, during the week of prayer, for the prayers of man apart
sure.
and at other times. But yeah, to be able to send those updates and send those prayer requests, and that's wonderful to be able to do. So we thank you for that as well. Yeah.